Okay, so this is Keith Robinson, um, EDIS651, focus question 6, which deals with curriculum strategy. So one of the themes through the Advancing Differentiation textbook by Richard M. Cash is the idea of uh, giving students options in the way in which they learn, how they learn, and how they demonstrate what they've learned. So for this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight and really explain the sectionalism unit that I created after our class with Ben Hartnell and after reading through some of the chapters in the Cash book. Differentiation is something that I've always struggled with in my classroom. So this sectionalism unit that I created came directly from this class, from some of the things that I got from the textbook. So to begin, I created a fairly detailed outline of the entire differentiated sectionalism unit. I begin with the context for learning. So here I talk a little bit about what sectionalism is, how it leads to, it's the time period between 1820 and 1860 that leads up to the American Civil War. Students in my class, a few days before we started this sectionalism unit, had watched a video and had taken notes that was all about sectionalism. That was one way that I helped them get a little bit of context knowledge before we got into the unit. And in the context for learning, I also noted in here that the unit is to be taught after the unit on manifest destiny / westward expansion. The sectionalism unit builds upon learning from that earlier unit and incorporates it into the current unit. In my sectionalism unit, I do highlight the standards, the 8th grade history standards from the Ohio's Learning Standards for Social Studies, which were adopted in 2018. I do have those highlighted, and I have a link to the standards themselves. I talk in here about this unit should last about 3 weeks. The sectionalism unit should last roughly 3 weeks from start to finish. I also included, I also included in the sectionalism unit some of Kaplan's model for differentiated instruction, which I will get into the role this plays a little bit later on. And then in the unit overview, I kind of spell out how the first few days should go. So I begin by showing students as a whole group a quick video from the 1990 Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War, about Fort Sumter. And then I kind of have the kids in groups complete this activity here. So summarize what happens in the video, who are the opposing sides, what does secession mean, and how is the event at Fort Sumter different from other wars we had studied. Here I try to tie into the learning previous knowledge, but they all very quickly see how different Fort Sumter was from other wars and other battles that we had fought in that we learned about, because it's always the United States versus. Now they understand it's the United States versus the United States. So what caused that to happen? What would cause the United States to fight against themselves, which kind of sets up the sectionalism unit. The video that I show, here's a link to it as well. I also, that first day, I kind of discussed the sectionalism unit essential questions and related supporting guiding questions. I pulled these from the Georgia Social Studies Standards, and here's a link here to that. I have one big enduring understanding. How does conflict within a society result in change? And then from there, there are multiple driving questions or supporting questions that get us to the essential question of how does conflict within a society result in change. Day number 2, I begin by reminding students of the enduring understanding, conflict, and change. I put students in groups and we kind of do a quick review. We take a look at the westward expansion map, I have the kids fill out in groups, in very small dynamic groups. I have them fill out the westward expansion map, have them create little icons that describe what's the story, what's the quick and dirty of the story of how we established each one of those sections. How did we go from 13 British colonies to from sea to shining sea? And then we come up with 3 specific ways that we added to our how we fulfilled manifest destiny. And on day 2, by the way, we are answering this first supporting question: how did the United States fulfill manifest destiny? Then on day 3, I introduced the sectionalism unit packet, and we begin to talk about differentiation. And here's where the differentiation really begins, because at this point, students have the same packet that they need to complete, but they can do it in numerous ways, whether it's using the traditional textbook reading, YouTube videos, primary source documents, supplemental books, independent internet research. Students have all kinds of different ways that they can learn the content and complete the packet. So that's where the differentiation begins. And I do have a link to the packet here, which we're going to be looking at in a little bit more detail here in just a minute. Along the way, I do have to break up the monotony so students aren't just all period long working independently. I do have a handful of mini lesson topics that I came up with as I see multiple students struggling with items, or I don't feel like they're getting a complete understanding. I have a list of different mini lesson topics that I could teach at the beginning or at the end of class to kind of help them. Last but not least, in this overview, I also have some of the formative assessments here listed, ways that I'm going to use formative assessments throughout this unit, and some of the summative assessment options. Students could take a traditional test comprised of multiple choice, fill in the blank, short response, but students could also do an essay test, a one-pager, create a science fair board, or a video, or create a video documentary. All that goes back to these essential, the enduring understanding and the supporting questions. Now, the way that I got this information to students was on Google Classroom. I always keep my Google Classroom lessons numbered. So this was lesson number 64. So they have a place that they can go. But here is a take a look. This is a unit packet. Here's the unit packet that they were answering. They were going to be completing throughout this. This should look familiar. This was on the overview that I had. This is what students will have this, and they will be referring to this numerous times. They also have a copy of that context for learning and a link to that video that they had already seen. Now, the way the packet is set up, there are numerous. So we as a group, we answered this: how did the United States fulfill manifest destiny? A question. There's 3 sections to this unit. Each one of the sections begins with one of the other supporting questions. So section 1, how did the admission of new territories and states increase the tension between free states and slave states? You see that right here. These are some of the key terms that the students need to define. And then as they go through and answer these short response questions, I do have the requirement they use as many key terms in their answers as possible. And so as students are working on this in class, I am just simply walking around the room, helping them out. Some students are getting these answers from the textbook. Some are pulling them from internet research. Some are going to different YouTube pages. There are other specific internet websites that I have told them are good resources. So students had a lot of choice in how they learn the material. Another way that students had choices was through the list of mini projects. So instead of taking quizzes along the way, I gave students the option to do one tier 1 project and one tier 2 project. So this builds in even more choice and even more differentiation, because students now can hone in on more specific aspects of sectionalism, and they had the opportunity to really delve into more specific aspects of it. So they had some choice in their learning. So some of the options I had was an annotated timeline, an NCAA style bracket, memes, a comic strip, a collage, text message conversation, crossword puzzle, internet scavenger hunt. You can see T1 equals tier 1. There's some T2 or tier 2 projects. They had to do one of each. And along the way, I had different templates for them, just different ways to help them along the way. So going back to Google Classroom, the other thing that I created for them was this accountability tool. And this accountability tool just helps students pace themselves. One of the things we want students to do is to be responsible for their own learning. So this was meant to help them pace themselves. These due dates weren't set in stone as far as the unit packet went. They were set in stone, though, as far as by March 18th, mini project 1 needed to be done, mini project 2 needed to be done, and the final assessment needed to be turned in by March 27th. So that is an overview of my differentiated sectionalism unit. I took the ideas for this from Advancing Differentiation, Thinking and Learning for the 21st Century by Richard M. Cash, as well as from some of our classroom discussions and the workshop that we had with Dr. Ben Hartnell.